Hi, I'm Francis from Bipolar Edinburgh. Thanks for joining. Brains, bugs and bread. What we eat influences who we are. So, what we're going to hear about just now about genes and why that's not the full story. A little bit about a journey that my partner and I took on a low-carb, not keto diet. How that transformed, I think, my life and hers, and then the curiosity that arose as to why it happened, and my interest in bugs, microbiota, and so on, and fungi, or fungi as they like to say, which is even becoming more prominent, I think, in the world of mental health, and a couple of things you can do going forward. Okay, so, well, I was not genetically blessed because, bipolar is about the most inheritable mental illness, and, genes play a large part. And so when I looked at my mother's family, there was quite a lot of depression. My grandmother took her own life. There were two other of my relatives, including my cousin, took their lives, etc. And was it really the genes or the environment? I mean, they lived in the slums of Lochee, and then they moved to the what was called Europe's worst sink estate in Whitfield in the hill town. So on the other side of the family, then it was bipolar. And so if you go to this census from 1871, there in the middle, Robert Glasson is my great-great-grandfather, shoemaker, in the asylum, described as a lunatic. And he went in at age 34, and you can see he's surrounded there by an architect and a doctor of medicine. So bipolar's always affected people from all walks of life. But if you look at the same census, then his wife, Christina, there, and 6 children, including William Glasson, who'd been my great-grandfather, she described herself as a widow, and I have to this day no idea whether the children knew their father was still alive. That was really stigma. And then things have changed because he was in the asylum for 37 years before he got released into care in the community. So thankfully things have changed these days. But I come from a long line of people with bipolar. So, genetics may load the gun. This story starts University of Edinburgh visit in July of 2024, so 2 years ago, when Maya from Bipolar Scotland and Michelle and I were invited by Professor Danny Smith, Chair of Psychiatry, to have sandwiches and a catch-up and so on, which is very kind of him. He's a great man. And at the time, I was really suffering from being obese, and so I got fed up with that, and I said, in slightly a hypomanic time that day, I'm thinking about starting a ketogenic diet, I said. And then Professor Smith said, are you planning on doing that without clinical supervision? And that was a very wise thing to say, because there are, for some people, significant risks of various things, including ketoacidosis, which is potentially life-threatening. So actually doing a keto diet without supervision is taking quite a risk. And when I went home, of course, I thought about it, and I spoke with my partner. My partner has Crohn's disease, so that's an autoimmune disease. She was fitted with a thing called a stoma about 20 years ago after multiple surgeries. And that's where effectively they take, the diseased gut, cut it out. And she has no colon, or she has a very short length of duodenum, minimum that she can get away with and still live. And so, and she's on an immunosuppressant, modern one. So for all these reasons, we both thought this was very unwise to embark on a keto diet, potentially unsafe. So, Pam also suffered really badly from osteoarthritis of both the hands, knees, and feet, and that was a problem for her, particularly because her trade, she's a costume tailor, and so she does, costumes for films and TV and opera and theatre and that sort of thing. So a lot of hand sewing, and at the end of the day, her hands would be absolutely in agony. And then coming down the stairs in the morning, she would be hanging onto the banister, crabbing sideways down the stairs because her knees were sore before she got going. So for all these reasons, probably keto wasn't a good idea. But we decided on low carb. So what is low carb? The average Western diet is about 330 grams of carbohydrate per day. Keto diet's about 20 to 30, what they call net carbs a day. And we said, okay, we sat down, I did some maths and so on, and I did a bit of reading. I said, okay, we're going to go try about 90 grams. We're going to keep out of ketosis. So how did we do that? Well, we made by measurement. So I bought a Keto Mojo meter to record glucose and ketones, the ketone bodies that we all hear about. So you can see that's got, you prick your finger with a little lancet, and a drop of blood on the brown strip at the top left would measure your glucose, and then you'd swap strips in the machine and do the kind of teal blue coloured strip, and that would measure your ketones, and it all goes onto your phone and gets stored. You can use urine strips or a breath meter, a bit less accurate, but maybe that's better for people who don't like lancets. And then everything we ate, we looked at on an app. There's lots of them around that we used, I think, called MyFitnessPal. That allow you to, for example, scan the barcode on what you're about to eat, and it would record and store what your net carbs have been, and your fats and your proteins, what they call macros. We didn't weigh food, we just ate until we were satiated, until we were full. And I actually used quite a lot of starchy foods like onions in cooking, etc., to make sure that we weren't in ketosis. So we would use that as a source of carbohydrates, mainly in the main, which is good. But what we did cut out were the bread and orange juice and those sorts of things that are very, very carb heavy. So we were sugar free, really. I mean, it went from no cakes, no biscuits, no orange juice, obviously no sugar in your tea or whatever. And then we were also free of bread, all types of bread, doesn't matter whether it's sourdough or anything else, it's still bad. So carbs are the same. So rice, potatoes, pasta, we just cut those out. And for a while we used keto bread. Now, it's something you can get on Amazon, but it's a couple of months we stopped using it because one, it's really expensive, and two, it just never goes off. So it's probably pretty chock full of preservatives. But it was quite a good way to transition. If you've been eating bread all your life, it's quite a good way of transitioning. You can pop these in the toaster or whatever, and then get used to, after a while, you think, you know what, I don't need this. So what happened? So after 9 months, I ate a lot of cheese, and cheese is supposed to make you. Cheese is fat. Fat's supposed to make you fat, right? But I lost just over 19 kilograms, and moved from clinically obese to slightly overweight. And I estimate that we didn't quite get the 90 grams. We ended up at 75, and so on. And yeah, we were never really in ketosis. So the average for us was half a millimole, just under, resting ketones, whereas over 2 is really considered sort of a good level of ketosis. So we deliberately stayed away from ketosis, and we were fairly spot on to where we hoped to be. Then, after 9 months, it was time to reintroduce foods, to have a less restricted diet. So how to do that? So I got a continuous glucose monitor, which measures your blood sugar, not your ketones, blood sugar, in real time, which you can read on your phone. And that's sort of used often by people with diabetes to help control the blood sugar. But it's also used in sort of lifestyle or nutrition experts. There's a link on our website to the Channel 4 program called The Glucose Goddess, which is a nutrition expert helping people change diet and seeing miraculous results from all sorts of illnesses. And so what you've got, this allows you to avoid glucose spikes. So this would be me reintroducing a food, so it could be potatoes or root vegetables like carrots and so on, a bit more starchy. And but by reintroducing that, we were back to what I call a normal sort of normalish diet. But this, if you look, is a spike, and that, as you can see, suddenly my blood sugar shot up very steeply. It then flattens off, and the reason it flattens off is because the pancreas starts producing huge amounts of insulin to try and stop this sugar rush hitting. And then, of course, when you've digested the food, all of that insulin in your system makes you crash down the other side and go hypo, which is the red area there. And then you repeat the cycle, because then you feel tired, and then you feel hungry, and then you eat something else that's sugary, and the whole thing yo-yos backwards and forwards. And before you know it, your body is becoming what we call insulin resistant, and you're well on your way to type 2 diabetes. So that was one corn tortilla in a wrap, in a takeaway. That was what caused that spike. So we continue to largely avoid sugar, and I call it the granny diet because it's what my grandmother cooked, all those years ago. Meat and 2 veg. It was like a green veg, a potato, and a meat or fish. That was it. That was basically what we ate. And we eat 1.5 meals a day now. It's reduced the quantity of food that we eat. And we don't feel hungry. I don't have breakfast because I don't want breakfast. I start feeling peckish about 2:30 in the afternoon. So, all good for you, good for your health. So, it's all about glycemic response in this case. So, this is a Dr. David Unwin, who you may have seen on TV or heard about him. But I mean, he's a GP, I think, from Manchester area, who years ago, 15 years ago, so had so many people coming into his practice who were type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic. He thought, I've got to find out what's causing all this. And he did a lot of research. And the answer is that he created, and others created, these scales about what the equivalent is in sugar. So if you take wheat flour white in the middle there, 100 grams is just about 2 slices of toast with maybe a bit of jam on it. And that's the equivalent of taking 13.3 heat teaspoons of sugar and swallowing them at the same time. White rice, not much better. There are lots of things you can eat. You notice this list is all vegetarian, so there are lots of things you can eat which would not cause that spike. Obviously, for those who are not vegetarian, then types of meat, etc., don't have carbs in them, or eggs don't have carbs in them, etc. But there's a broad variety of food that you can eat that's not going to cause these glucose spikes and damage your health. So, just to summarise, I'll be quiet for a second. There we go. So, yes, so Pam, I don't see her crabbing down the stairs holding onto the banister. I don't hear her complaining about how sore her hands are after work. And for me, I think the hypomania at last is gone. And say that was, it kept getting better. So, books I'd recommend for low carb. The Dr. George Reid book, I wish I'd known about it before I started my diet. It would have been much, much easier. It's a really good book. And she, again, you can see her on YouTube and all sorts. Harvard psychiatrist. And then the cookbook's really good. I'd recommend that. We've got a couple of copies of each, I think, in our library. So why did my depression and cognitive function and Pam's osteoarthritis improve, relatively quickly, maybe 5 months during a strict diet phase? And my hypomania took a bit longer, but it did keep getting better even when we were on a more relaxed diet. So, well, the metabolic psychiatry explanation, I read this Christopher Palmer book and then I read it again because it really didn't fit my data in so many ways. And I'm like, there's something else here. This doesn't fit for me. And so I noticed 3 things. First of all, my tooth film had almost vanished, and I checked with a neighbour and she had noted the same. Can't remember whether I clean my teeth or not often. Apparently, my breath was sweeter. And lastly, I had a fungal growth on my head about the size of a 50p piece. And I had one on my opposite end, of a intimate end, and that had gone. Both of them had gone. And I was like, I wonder if it's something to do with my immune system or something like that. So I became interested in microbiology and immunology. So the oral microbiome, what's in your mouth, there's about 900 species of different bugs in your mouth. But the 3 that I was interested in, Streptococcus mutans, that's a sugar-loving bacteria. It's the one responsible for rotting your teeth, or one of them that's rotting your teeth. That would be my tooth film mainly. Candida albicans, yeast, so fungi, which, as you know, is responsible for thrush or some vaginal stuff, and is been around with humans forever, but can get out of hand and become pathogenic. So, but it's another sugar lover. Both of them are co-conspirators sometimes in the mouth. And then finally, another one called Fusobacterium nucleatum, which resides in the oral tooth socket there, you can see. And that, again, is not a great bacteria. And when it gets out of the mouth and into the colon, it's associated with colorectal cancer. And so that's a hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria that gives you bad breath. So, 100 years ago, a psychiatrist by the name of Henry Cotton was taking people's teeth out that were in a psychiatric hospital, and some of them, not all of them, but some of them improved, went into complete remission. It was very inconsistent, but as I say, there's a whole number of case studies that he showed, and he actually spoke, I think, in Edinburgh. And then similarly about the same time, in Birmingham, Thomas Chippers Graves, who was the sort of superintendent of all the psychiatric hospitals around Birmingham, he describes, a lecture again in Edinburgh, he describes how he put somebody under, a young woman under general anaesthetic and kind of washed out her sinuses. So this was 1924, so this was before antibiotics were discovered. And again, made complete recovery. And he wasn't a fringe character. He was, I think, the chair of what's now the Royal College of Psychiatrists for about 4 years. So there was a lot of microbial stuff went on in that sort of pre-Second World War period, but it all got forgotten about. One of the issues with washing the person's sinuses out is the sinuses, or the nose there, is one of the only place in the human body where your brain is dangling in thin air. Your olfactory bulb, so used for smelling, neurons from that dangle out through a kind of Swiss cheese piece of cartilage called the cribriform plate, and are very, therefore, a bit of a weak spot for fungi or bacteria to invade. And that's why they think perhaps that people with dementia maybe lose their sense of smell maybe 10 years before they start being symptomatic. So, it's a weak spot. Yeah, so other examples of bugs and bipolar, this was someone, a psychiatrist in New Jersey, saying, listen, all these pediatric bipolar cases I'm seeing, they all of them, or 92% of them, have some tick-borne disease, so Lyme disease or Babesia, which is a parasite. They've got to be related. What are you doing about it? So, similarly with Mycobacterium tuberculosis, so that's a bacteria that sort of looks like a fungi, is associated with, greatly increased chances of psychotic episodes. So bugs and brains. So again, I think on a website, this woman, Jane, there's a video of her and her husband did a DIY poo transplant, not recommended to do at home, and completely went into remission after being really, really unwell with bipolar. And so much so surprising that one of the sort of foremost academic psychiatrists in Australia, Professor Gordon Parker, just recently wrote a book. I think we've got a copy in the library as well. And there's a QR code if you would like to get the link to the video. Otherwise, you can just go into YouTube and do a risky DIY poo experiment. You'll find it. So, yeah. So I'm hoping, that by now you're thinking, maybe bugs and brains are related. There's definitely more to this than meets the eye. I think the main thing to remember is bugs are, there's a lot of them. They're not just a thin smattering. If you, with your poo, about a third of the weight of your poo are dead bugs. There's a lot in there. And, when you eat something, they eat first. And you eat second, and you eat also what they dispose of. The metabolites is the polite term. And so, consequently, if you're a sugar-loving bacteria, sugar-loving fungi, and somebody stops eating sugar, it affects them more than it affects us. So change in diet do affect sort of microbes in a positive way. And I think the other thing to remember is our immune system really determines what bugs live on us. But equally, the bugs that live on us often, can cause inflammation and so on in your immune system. So it's a very two-way relationship between the immune system and the micro and microbiota. So, an example, in bipolar, this is important. So, Barry Marshall, Robin Warren. So, Robin Warren was a very eagle-eyed Australian pathologist who, back in the 80s, called his colleague over to have a look at some particular bacteria which were kind of corkscrew shaped and looked like they dug in to stomachs around stomach ulcers. Now, at the time, stomach ulcers were thought too much spicy food, too much stress, and so they started to look at this, and they became more and more convinced that actually Helicobacter pylori was responsible for this, and people and doctors thought they were crazy. You know, they ignored them, and then they laughed at them, and then they got really angry. You're being irresponsible. You shouldn't be practicing medicine, etc., etc. And everyone refused to acknowledge this might be a possibility until Barry Marshall, in a controlled experiment, stood up and drank a beaker of Helicobacter pylori, and he got very sick with stomach ulcers. And thankfully he recovered, so that he and Robin Warren picked up their Nobel Prize 20 years later for that discovery. So it's something that has an elevated risk with bipolar. There's lots of research out there. And it can be asymptomatic in some ways. In other words, you don't notice it. It does obviously increase your risk of stomach ulcers, but it may do other things as well. So what I do recommend is that you can check out the Guts UK website. That will give you a little bit more information about it. But like I did, I would not advise, but recommend you think about getting a test, which is £10 from Amazon, and it's a lateral flow test, so you don't have to send it off to a lab or anything, and just check stuff out. If you do end up positive, then you probably need to speak to your psychiatrist first before your GP, because changes to that can change your medication and so on. So just be aware. But probably a good first step to make sure you don't have it. So, does diet alter bugs? Well, the person we need to ask is Professor Tim Spector, who's someone, again, you've probably seen on TV. He's written a good few books, and he did a thing called the Zoe Project, and they collected sort of the metagenomics, or the bug DNA, or bug RNA, I should say, diet data, health data, over 34,000 people. And a couple of them, or 746 to be precise, they did a couple of dietary interventions on clinical trials, changing their diet. And they had big improvements in healthy bacteria and reductions in unhealthy bacteria. So it was very effective. And actually, things like bad bacteria, such as Firmicutes, that's the one, remember, Streptococcus mutans, which was on my teeth, fell by 100 times because of a change in diet. And that's very consistent with my experience. Yeah, and so again, positive change in diet, very associated with positive changes in the gut microbiome. So, fungi. Well, they've been really neglected in research, and I think because they were small in number, but they're much larger in size. We need to really sort of pay them more attention. And if you think about our immune system, when our immune system collapses, say in AIDS, for example, in Africa, people pass away or die of fungal infections far more frequently than bacterial infections. So we've been sort of underestimating what a good job our immune system does keeping fungal pathogens at bay. But it's been really easy. You look at all these old papers and you think, well, where's the fungal stuff? And the answer is, of course, because they've been looking for bacterial RNA, and really easy to miss the DNA. And also it's very hard to get the DNA out of the bacteria because of the very hard shell that they've got. But, you know, more and more, just over the last year in particular, microbiome, so in other words, the fungal biome, really is starting to get more attention for schizophrenia, bipolar, and autism. So we're starting to, I think, just starting to understand quite how important fungus can be. And one of the things, of course, is that, you know, fungi are much closer to us in terms of cell structure than bacteria are, and they share a lot of pathways. So the pathway for us that takes tryptophan from our turkey or whatever food that we ingest, and we end up making neurotransmitters such as serotonin. You know, fungus wants to eat that on the way, so it can disrupt us making neurotransmitters. And so we support now within an organisation I'm involved with, a charitable trust I'm involved with, down who spent her time at the University of Cambridge looking at that, exactly that stuff. So, genes are only part of the story. We are what we eat, especially with bipolar, and I can talk about that another time, but why it's important that it's more true with people with bipolar than otherwise. The benefits from going low carb for me and Pam have been huge. Yeah, my advice, I'm not allowed to give dietary advice. If I was hypothetically giving dietary advice, I'd say avoid sugar spikes. And if you can, measure and record what you're doing. Keep a log of it. If you want to do it on an app, great. But otherwise, just keep a diary. Metabolic health, immune system, and bipolar are really, really, really interconnected. I recommend you check for H. pylori if you can. It really, I think, microbial and fungal, I think now affects mental illness. The Zoe Project, better eating, better bugs. And I am that fun guy who suspects yeast and fungal spores may affect our illnesses. So, going forward, in the autumn, the University of Edinburgh will be advertising for trial participants, which is a Energize BD trial, and I think that's comparing diet to reduce depression. So that's, I think, both ketogenic and NHS Eat Well, I think, comparison, something like that. But that's an opportunity to get some supervision and in a trial, and I think it would be really exciting. I think it follows on from the keto pilot that was done a few years ago, which many of our group have participated in. Or, if you want, low carb support group. So I plan to host small meetings, just 6 people, for us just to give and receive mutual support. So we can't give dietary advice because that is against the law, apart from anything else. But we can at least support each other and exchange information. So about where do we buy such and such, or what was a good low carb alternative to that, etc. And it's not for ketogenic. People following ketogenic diets, that's really should be supervised professionally. So just, check the calendar for dates. Thank you.